Welcome to Introduction to Medicine 2020. We've been running these courses at Bradford Royal Infirmary for about 10 years now. This is the first time we've had to do a virtual presentation, and that's all because of the COVID pandemic. My name's Alex Brown. I'm a consultant here at the Bradford Royal Infirmary. I've been the lead for undergraduate medical education for a number of years, and I'm also the Deputy Chief Medical Officer. I am no expert in how to get into medical school. I have nothing to do with admissions at medical schools. However, for 10 years I've tried to help with staff here at Bradford, help students apply for medicine and actually get into the medical school of their choice. I've also had 2 children who are now qualified doctors, so I feel I've got some insight into some of the tips that people need to try and pick the right medical school. I'm going to ask 2 basic questions, and the first one is this. What's the most difficult step? Is it achieving your A-level grades? Is it being offered an interview for a medical school? Or is it being given an offer of a place? Now, hopefully at the end of this presentation, you'll have an idea which is the correct answer. The second question as well I want you to think about whilst we're going through this presentation is, how do you choose your medical school? Is it the prestige of the medical school, the city or the university you want to study in, or is it the type of medical course? Different universities either produce a traditional course or problem-based learning, and most universities nowadays have what we call an integrated course, so they integrate clinical sciences with actual practical work on the wards. So lots of medical schools in the country, and this actual slide is out of date. Approximately 3 years ago, the government increased the number of medical schools. They're not on here at the moment. So there's places like Sunderland, Edge Hill, and several other medical schools. So lots to choose from. So how do you try and decide which one to choose? Do you go by a course that's problem-based learning? Some people believe that problem-based learning course is better designed to make you a learner for the future, because you have a problem, you've got to go away and think about it, come up with a solution, research it, and present it to your peers. Some people, especially having done A-levels, prefer a more traditional course, which is lecture-based, where some would say that you're spoon-fed information, but it's what you've, in lots of ways, been used to at school, and some people prefer that style. Most courses now are integrated and will actually have a mix of clinical sciences, practical clinical education, some lectures, but some problem-based learning styles. So it's up to you which one you want to do. There's lots of routes into medicine. I'm going to concentrate on people who are school leavers. The standard courses, the foundation courses, which are gateways into medical school. And there's graduate entry courses, most of which are 4 years long, and after people have studied a degree which is akin to medicine, so one of the biological sciences. But we're going to concentrate on the school leavers. Now, if you take people of my generation, and I'm not a typical entrant into medical school because it took me 10 years to get in there, and I applied as a mature student, having been rejected at the age of 18. But for most people my age, they just applied, they were given an offer, and it was all based on their academic performance. That's clearly not the case nowadays. Nowadays, you apply, if you're lucky you get an interview, and then you get an offer, and that offer and the interview are based upon more than just academic performance. It's based upon how you do in the interview, and it's based upon a lot of extracurricular type activities where you've demonstrated that you actually want to do a degree in medicine and that you are suited for a degree in medicine. And people would argue that it's producing better students than it did in my day, because it's not just based on your intellectual ability, it's also based upon your fit to be a doctor. So let's take a pretend medical school, and this is not atypical. A medical school may get up to 3,500 applicants for about 150 places. Now, in the olden days, when I was a lad, A-levels were invariably marked in a different way to the way they're marked nowadays. In those days, people would just be given a grade depending on where they were on the normal distribution of marks. So if you were at the top end of the scale, say in the top 10%, you may be allocated an A-level grade. If you were between 10 and 15%, you may get a B, and so forth. So irrespective of how good a cohort that year is going through to study, the same percentage of people would get high A-level grades. Consequently, it meant that only a small percentage of people would get 3 A's or 2 A's and a B. So it was fairly straightforward for medical schools to sort of limit their criteria purely by academic performance. Because if you're the dean of a medical school and you've got 150 places, you don't want to be in a position where you've got 300 students turning up on day one because you've got nowhere to put them. So to slim down the numbers, you could do that on predicted A-level grades. Current A-levels are marked slightly differently. And we read, which I think is unfair for your generation, about inflation grades in people's grades, both at GCSE and at A-level. But nowadays, they set a standard based on that exam. And the standard setting process will be anybody who gets over this mark is warranted an A. Anybody who gets over this mark is warranted a B. So consequently, more people are getting A and B grades at A-level. So medical schools have a bit of a problem now. They can't go back to the old-fashioned system and just say, we'll cut by academic performance because that will give the number of people we want, because they'd have too many bodies. So that, and also in line with the fact that they want to be a bit more diverse and a bit more selective in the people that they actually select for their medical school, they've had to invent different ways of sorting people out. So if you take this hypothetical medical school, 3,500 applicants, if it's got 150 places, you've got about a 1 in 23 chance of actually getting a place in that medical school. If I've got a medical school with about 150 places, probably want to interview about 600 people. So I've got a 1 in 6 chance of having an interview. I'll probably send out offers to about 200. Some will reject me, some won't get the academic performance that they want in their A-levels. So I've probably got about a 1 in 3 chance. So about 170 will accept my offer and about 150 in my medical school. That's what I'm aiming for. So the hardest part, statistically, is getting the interview. Once you've got the interview, then you can concentrate on your academic performance if you've been given an offer to get your A-level grades. And to be honest, most people who are applying for medicine are steered in that direction because they're expected to get good A-level performance. So what we have to concentrate on is how we get an interview for that particular medical school. So medical schools have a little bit of a headache, really. They can't cut by purely A-level grades now, so they can't cut by just academic ability. And they've got to use other non-academic attributes or use other non-A-level tests to actually rank people so they can select them for their interview. And they may look at your personal statement. We'll come on in a minute to see that some universities don't look at personal statements to see how they're actually going to cut the numbers down so that they've got the required number that they wish to interview for that course. So no longer is it just based on what you think you're going to get for your A-levels. It's based on your GCSE marks and how well you've performed in them. It's also based on these other tests, which you'll all probably be familiar with. UK CAT, now called UCAT, has been around for a number of years. BMAT has been around as well for a number of years. Some medical schools use that. Some medical schools use UK CAT. And GAMSAT is designed for people who are graduate entry into medical school. So the UK CAT exam, approximately 2 hours. It's an aptitude test. There's no scientific content. It's all about verbal, quantitative and abstract reasoning. You can do courses, you can buy books to actually give you some revision on how to use this. BMAT, again, 2 hours. It's a biomedical sciences admission test. It's about clinical skills. It's about writing tasks. And it's more sort of academically based. And GAMSAT, much longer exam. It's based from what they've done in Australia. And it talks about humanities and social sciences. Now, invariably, whatever medical school you apply for, it will also have one of these as a criteria to get a certain mark to get into that medical school. And you need to concentrate, as you're applying for your medical school, equally hard on these additional tests than you would on your A-levels. The key thing is, what the medical school wants is all on their website. So you need to do your research. If you remember that map I showed you of all the medical schools in the UK, there are a lot of them. But you need to go through every single medical school systematically to work out what they want and how you actually fit into what they need. If we take a typical medical school, and I've taken 3 medical schools I'm just going to use for example, just randomly. Sheffield Medical School, there's its website. Go onto its website, nice and glossy, but you need to dig down into that website. And once you get into that website, the key features are at the top. Applicants who have the highest UCAT scores will be invited to attend interviews, and they use multiple mini interviews, which is the criteria for most medical schools now. The remaining applicants will be deemed unsuccessful. We do not read or score your personal statements as part of the selection process. However, the activities, the interests and values the candidates expressed may well be explored during an interview. So there's Sheffield. It's offering a medical school. It's offering the basic same qualification as every other medical school in the country. It doesn't read your personal statement, and all it's interested in is your UCAT score. And they will pick the top percentage of people to then bring in for interview. So if you've done UCAT, and the advantage of UCAT, you can do it before you apply, and you do not have a particular score, I would suggest you don't actually go for Sheffield University, because no matter what your predicted A-level grades are, no matter what your other interests which have been developed within your personal statement, and no matter what your GCSE grades are, your UCAT score, if it's poor, your application will be rejected. That's take Northern Ireland, Belfast Medical School, Queen's Medical School, another university that requires you to actually undertake UCAT before applying. So if you go onto their website, as with Sheffield, nice and glossy. Dig down deeper into their details of their admission, and they have a scoring system. And their scoring system for UCAT is combined with a scoring system for your GCSE grades. So UCAT, you can obtain a maximum of 6 points. So if you've scored very, very well on your UCAT score, you get 6 points. And it gives you an approximate breakdown historically of how many points you'll get for where you are with that UCAT score. If you score poorly, you will get 0. Now they add the UCAT score to the best of your GCSE scores, and they take the best 9 subjects. So if you've got A stars, which in new money is a grade 8 or 9, you get 4 points. If you've got an A, which in new money is a grade 7, you get 3 points. So if you take somebody who's got 9 A stars, so they would get 4 points for each A star, 4 9s are 36 points. If you add then a middling UCAT score, say they scored 3 for their UCAT score, that would be 39 points in total. If you had somebody who scored a 6, did well in UCAT, but had a mix of A's and B's, and maybe only got 26 points because of their GCSE scores, they'd only have a much lower score at 32 than would the individuals who had a lower UCAT score but better GCSEs. So an applicant with a middling score for UCAT but good GCSEs is likely to get an interview in Belfast, but a university like Sheffield, which again requires UCAT, puts much more weighting on UCAT because it doesn't take into account your GCSE scores. So if you've done well in UCAT, you need to think of some universities like Sheffield. If you've done middling and not that well, but you've done well in your GCSEs, one of your get-out clauses may be a university like Belfast. So Sheffield, excellent GCSEs, UCAT score, sorry, application goes in the bin, you're not going to be interviewed. Queen's, Belfast, excellent GCSEs, UCAT score, chances are you're going to get an interview because you'll actually score collectively quite highly. If you take our local medical school in Leeds, they use BMAT. And again, glossy website, all people dressed up in their scrubs and things like that. If you dig down into it, it's much more sort of generic really. It says your BMAT scores will be scrutinised when selectors consider the rest of your application. That's your personal statement, your academic background and your referee's report. Now, Sheffield and Leeds are only about 40, 50 miles away, but Sheffield doesn't read your personal statement, But Leeds University is saying it does read your personal statement and it takes into effect other factors. It's much more difficult for a university like Leeds to actually prejudge how well you're going to do with your personal statement and what the weighting is for your BMAT score than it is for other universities. But it could be, because it's the local university, your university of choice. So this slide's a year or two old now, but basically it gives you an idea of 3 random universities, 2 admit are local and 1's further afield in Northern Ireland. And it gives an idea of what the cut-offs are to try and get you an interview. Now I suggest that you need to go through every single university that offers medicine, including all the new ones in this country, and rank them by where you think you will get in, based upon what your UCAT score is or how well you've done at BMAT, also based upon your GCSE grades. And that will give you a ranking list of where you should apply for. So, weighting of scores by institution, UCAT, BMAT scores, we've talked about that. It's really important that you take into account how that institution uses those add-ons, which aren't your personal statement and aren't your predicted A-level grades. It would make no sense, to me anyway, if you have applied, you've done both UCAT and BMAT, that you put all your eggs in one basket dependent upon your UCAT score or your BMAT score. You may wish to have a mix of universities that you apply for in your application form. Most universities, in fact all of them, list what they consider to be your non-academic attributes. And these are things that need to go into your personal statement and will actually be reflected upon usually in an interview. You then have to think about your type of course. Do you want a traditional course? Do you want a problem-based learning course? Or do you want an integrated course? It makes no sense saying I want to go to a traditional university if you can't get into it. It makes no sense geographically picking a university that you won't get into because you haven't actually fulfilled its admission criteria, particularly its criteria to get an interview. Try and get an affinity for that university. It's much more difficult, obviously, with the COVID pandemic, but most will have open days. A lot of them will be virtual. You may have connection with that city. You may have relatives or friends who already go to that university. If you have a connection to that area, if you get to interview and somebody says, why have you picked this city or why have you picked this university, it's much easier to answer that question. So in my opinion, and it is my opinion, one of the biggest hurdles is trying to get that interview. And you need to rank your university choice of where you think you will get an interview. Then you've got to think about what type of course you want to do, and then you've got to think about what university of choice that you want to go for. If you want to do medicine, the key is getting into medical school. Right, as far as your personal statement is concerned, as we've said, some universities will use it to rank you so you can go for an interview. Number won't. The most important thing in your personal statement has to be honest. Know what's in it, be able to justify what's in it. Most universities will actually give you a list of what they expect to see in your personal statement. And this is the time now when you're ranking those universities to look at what they expect, see if you have any shortfalls, and spend the next couple of months correcting them before you actually apply. Non-academic attributes, again, they're listed. Leadership, responsibility, organisational skills. These are things at the age of 17 may be difficult to actually list, but you need to think, have you organised a children's play group? Have you organised under 10s football? Have you taken the scouts away for a weekend? What was your role in that? Did you have a leadership role? And what, more importantly, have you learnt from that? Caring and compassion. People have worked in care homes before. Again, probably difficult to get a care home placement at this stage during COVID. But do you have relatives who've got caring needs? Can you demonstrate that you've got caring and compassionate nature? Are you honest? Well, you're not going to put in your personal statement, I've been done 15 times for robbing banks and stuff like that, so it's a bit difficult to say that. But they'll get that from the attitude. And part of the honesty is that, is my personal statement honest? Is it correct? Have I made things up? And your communication skills, personal statement, that will be your written communication, but the interviews will be your chance to prove that you're a good communicator. You can explain things in an understandable way to a wide audience. Work experience, difficult in COVID world. In this hospital, we've put a stop to it now for several months. And that's for protection of both the students and our staff and patients from this terrible infectious disease. Now, the MSc, which is the Medical Schools Council, has actually produced a document on guidance on gaining relevant experience to study medicine during COVID. And if you haven't looked at it, I would urge you to do so. It says things, and a number of the universities say that we understand it's difficult to get work experience, but you could list what you've tried to do. Have you listened to this lecture? Have you applied for the initial course? It shows that you've got a commitment, even though you couldn't fill it because of COVID, you've got a commitment to understand and want to study medicine. That's the website for the Medical Schools Council. It also gives lots of guidance on studying medicine in the UK, and it's a Bible that you need to go to. COVID-19, well, it's the elephant in the room. You may want to put something in your personal statement, which people didn't have to last year, about how you've coped with COVID-19, how you've coped both health-wise, yourself, your family, how society's coped. You'll need to know things in an interview, if you get to one, about the search for the vaccine, the inequalities in global health, how ethnicity, poverty, obesity, how other medical conditions such as diabetes increase the mortality and morbidity from COVID. What happened in care homes? Care homes, some would say, were abandoned a few months ago at the beginning of COVID because there wasn't enough PPE to go around. It often affects frail, elderly people the worst, and the mortality amongst this group is potentially quite high. With limited stock, was that the right attitude? Would the government want to do the same thing again? You've just got to have a judgment that you've thought about it. And how would you personally cope with working in a pandemic? One of the great things in this hospital is a lot of staff, the vast majority of staff, have stood up and actually taken this head on and have actually done that extra bit to actually help with the pandemic, both clinically and in admin roles. And it's brought a lot of staff together to actually get us through it, and unfortunately it isn't finished yet. So make sure you've got an understanding of how COVID-19 fits into it. So that concludes my talk. As I said, it's basically what my understanding is. It may be different to what you've been taught by your teachers, but I do think the most important thing is to try and get an interview. And the most important thing to get an interview is to interrogate that university's website so you know what its selection criteria are for an interview at that medical school. Medicine's a fantastic career. It's hard work. There's an awful lot of exams. Don't go into it lightly, but you're trying to do good for humanity, and it's a good way to actually spend your life devoting yourself to health and well-being of others. Thank you very much.